Hello from Daily Morals Story. Welcome to today's inspiring tale. Have you ever wondered what might happen if your boss saw how you really treat customers when you think nobody important is around? Would it change the way you speak, the way you perform your tasks, or the simple gestures you make toward people in need? If you find yourself intrigued by these questions, buckle up. This is the story of one undercover CEO who walked into his own auto repair shop dressed in plain clothes, ready to see the raw, unfiltered truth of his business. What he discovered that day not only revealed the best and the worst of human nature, but it also became the catalyst for a sweeping transformation, one that would affect the lives of everyone in that workshop, from the most jaded mechanic to the humblest customer just hoping to get their car up and running again. James Perry was the man behind the cap and jeans, though you wouldn't have known it at first glance. To the casual onlooker, he appeared to be an everyday guy off the street, maybe somebody coming in to inquire about an oil change or to check on a mysterious squeak in his car's engine. Yet behind the weathered baseball cap was a pair of observant eyes belonging to the founder and CEO of a rapidly expanding auto repair chain, a company he had built from the ground up. While the service bays buzzed with the sounds of air tools and idle chatter, James stood quietly, taking it all in, determined to catch a glimpse of how his employees treated customers when they believed no top executive was there to watch them. Most of them hurried around, too busy to offer him more than a curt nod. He might as well have been invisible, but one young mechanic treated him differently, with a warm, genuine respect that would turn out to be the spark James needed to revitalize his dream for this company. The day began like any other for the staff in the Brookside branch of James's auto repair business. Located in a medium-sized town that seemed to be growing faster than anyone could keep up with, the shop was a modest, nondescript building from the outside, with peeling paint on the facade and a small parking lot crammed with vehicles in various stages of repair. Inside, the chaos felt palpable. Telephones rang incessantly, customers lined up near the dusty waiting area, and a mix of engine oil and brake fluid scented the air. The employees, some seasoned, some relatively new, were caught in the typical rush of tasks. Nobody noticed James slipping into the reception area, wearing clothes that suggested he was more likely to be a construction worker than the company's CEO. Though James had once prided himself on knowing every employee by name, time and expansion had pulled him away from the front lines. He had become increasingly reliant on district managers to oversee day-to-day operations. Yet rumors of poor customer service, disgruntled staff, and a general cultural drift had reached his ears. He'd heard enough reports about rude or impatient employees that he couldn't ignore them any longer. Something had changed since his early days, back when he and a couple of friends started a small garage on the outskirts of town. It was supposed to be a place where people felt respected and cared for, a refuge from the impersonal big chains. Over the years, success rolled in, more branches opened, profits soared, but somewhere along the line, the spirit of warmth and decency began slipping away. So he made a decision. No more emails, no more second-hand accounts. He wanted to witness the atmosphere himself. Stepping inside, he absorbed the scene. A receptionist was on the phone with a frustrated customer. Another man flipped through a dog-eared magazine while waiting for someone to notice him. A mother with a restless toddler tried to soothe the child, glancing around for any sign of help. An older gentleman, hair neatly combed, hesitantly approached the counter, only to be told in a clipped tone, "1 second, sir, I'm busy." James felt a pang of disappointment. This wasn't the service culture he'd spent years preaching. Here, people were treated like inconvenient tasks instead of neighbors in need of assistance. He observed a handful of mechanics on the shop floor. Some wore blank expressions, heads down, focused solely on the vehicles before them. Others moved hastily, occasionally bumping into one another, letting out exasperated sighs. Then there was Marcus, a young mechanic with an earnest face, leaning in to listen intently to the concerns of an elderly customer. James watched from a distance as Marcus knelt down beside the old man's car, pointed out the tire's worn tread, and patiently explained why it was important to address it soon. The customer's expression shifted from confusion to relief. He seemed grateful for Marcus's gentleness and clarity. That, James thought, is exactly the kind of employee we need more of. He felt an instant admiration for Marcus, an almost fatherly pride, and decided to linger in the background to learn more about this mechanic who stood out in a sea of indifference. Evan was next to catch James's attention, though for different reasons. Tall, broad-shouldered, and sporting a perpetual scowl, Evan was one of the lead mechanics at this branch. He walked around as if he owned the place, barking orders at anyone in earshot. At one point, the older customer accidentally stood in Evan's path. Rather than gently asking him to step aside, Evan snapped, "Move it, old man! People are trying to work here." The customer stumbled away, visibly embarrassed. Marcus quickly intervened, apologizing for Evan's rudeness. In response, Evan shot Marcus a nasty glare and snarled something under his breath about wasting time with worthless conversation. James felt his jaw tighten. If this was how Evan behaved toward customers, how did he treat his fellow employees, especially when management wasn't around? After witnessing that exchange, James introduced himself to Marcus, but only as Jim, a local guy needing an oil change and a quick look at a squeaking noise. Marcus offered him a firm handshake, looked him in the eye and said, "Glad to help. Let's see what's going on with your car." Even though the shop was busy, Marcus took the time to make James feel heard. He asked questions about how frequently the squeak occurred, whether it was worse in the morning or after extended driving, and if there were any other unusual symptoms. While they talked, James noticed the chaotic environment around them. Tools were strewn about, a hydraulic lift squealed in protest from neglect, and overhead lights flickered just enough to give the place a gloomy cast. How had he never been informed of such disrepair? Leading James to an empty bay, Marcus politely asked him to pop the hood. Meanwhile, Evan walked by and rolled his eyes, muttering something about coddling the customers. Marcus appeared used to Evan's hostility, giving only a mild shrug. James found himself wanting to reassure Marcus that he was doing the right thing, but he couldn't break his cover yet. He had to keep observing, gleaning the truth of what his business had become. He took a seat on a battered stool, watching as Marcus skillfully maneuvered around the engine. Marcus's approach was slow and methodical, explaining each step for James's benefit. "I'm just going to check the belts first," he said, shining a small flashlight. "If they're cracked, frayed, or misaligned, that could easily cause squeaking." James nodded, peppering him with questions, partly to keep up the ruse of a customer, partly because he genuinely appreciated Marcus's clarity and depth of knowledge. Marcus was not only competent, he was patient and warm, a rarity in a place that seemed more focused on punching the clock than on forging human connections. If every branch of James's company had a Marcus, the rumors of poor service might never have started. But Marcus was just one bright star in a murky sky. When James asked about the general atmosphere in the shop, Marcus hesitated. "I love cars, and I like helping people," he finally said, tightening a bolt. "But we're understaffed, and sometimes it feels like we're just rushing everyone out the door. The boss, well, he's under a lot of pressure to keep things moving." James was careful not to let his expression reveal too much. Part of him wanted to apologize on the spot, to say, "I'm so sorry for letting it get this bad," but he stayed silent. He simply nodded, letting Marcus vent his frustrations. "I don't want to point fingers," Marcus added, "but folks here need to remember that every customer is a person with a story, not just a job to finish. We could do better." While Marcus wrapped up the inspection, James overheard a tense conversation between another mechanic and a frantic mother who needed her car fixed quickly so she could pick up her kids from school. The mechanic grunted, "Lady, it'll take as long as it takes." The mother looked on the verge of tears. Marcus caught sight of her too, and quickly jumped in. "Let's see what we can do," he offered gently, leaving James's car for a moment to assist. The mechanic shrugged and stepped aside, more than happy to let Marcus deal with the situation. That's when James realized how heavily some employees leaned on Marcus's goodwill. He was the one who did the emotional labor, the one who diffused tense situations with worried customers, and yet he was simply a lower-level mechanic with no official leadership title. That gave James pause. Eventually, Marcus returned and finished up James's car. "Looks like your belts are okay, just need a bit of lubrication and realignment," he explained. "We'll do the oil change too since you're due. Might take a bit longer because we have to order a specific filter for your model." James nodded, pretending to be an average customer, inconvenienced by the wait. "No problem," he said. I appreciate you taking the time to explain all this. Marcus gave a sheepish grin. That's my job, he replied. Or at least, the part of it that I think matters most. In that moment, James felt a swell of both pride and sadness. Pride for the employees like Marcus who upheld the vision, sadness that so many others seemed to have forgotten it. During the wait, James wandered around. He struck up conversations with a few other workers under the guise of being a chatty customer. In the break room, a cramped, dingy space with a poorly functioning microwave and a fridge that gave off a weird smell, he found 3 mechanics sitting in near silence. One scrolled through social media, another stared blankly at a local news segment playing on a small TV. The third sipped coffee from a styrofoam cup, looking bone-tired. James asked if they liked working here. He received half-hearted shrugs. One muttered, "It's a job," as if that was enough of an explanation. No one asked James about himself. No one seemed curious about the outside world, or about how the company was doing. Clearly, morale was low. Evan burst into the break room a few minutes later, rummaging through the mini-fridge. "We're behind schedule, you know," he snapped. "Stop lazing around and get back to it." One of the mechanics mumbled something about needing a break, but Evan cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Yeah, well, breaks don't pay the bills." He never looked James's way. After he left, the tension in the room eased, but none of the 3 mechanics seemed eager to return to work. They slowly got up, each wearing a resigned expression. As they filed out, James was left alone, leaning on the scratched-up table. He felt compelled to check the fridge, suspecting it might be nearly empty, and he was right. Aside from a couple of half-consumed beverages and a leftover sandwich in a plastic container, there was next to nothing. A well-McNugget break room with fresh snacks and beverages was always part of James's vision, a small token of appreciation for hard-working staff. Apparently that had fallen by the wayside as well. Returning to the main floor, James saw Marcus balancing multiple tasks, checking on a new arrival whose truck needed a thorough diagnostic, finishing up the oil change on James's vehicle, and talking a newly hired mechanic through the proper method of reinstalling an air filter. The younger mechanic struggled, fumbling with the clamps. Marcus crouched down, calmly showing him the correct technique, praising him when he finally got it right. Watching from the sidelines, James recalled his early days, working late nights with friends and volunteering to help them learn mechanical skills, fueled by the naive but sincere belief that they could build something special. That same eagerness lived in Marcus, though the corporate environment seemed to do its best to stifle it. As the afternoon wore on, James slipped outside to watch the final wave of customers come and go. The sun was beginning to sink behind the line of buildings, casting elongated shadows on the pavement. A father with 2 teenagers in tow arrived, the kids bickering about missing basketball practice. A man in a suit pulled up in a foreign luxury car, clearly annoyed that he had to wait in such a run-down place, as he called it. Through the glass door, James watched how the staff responded. Evan, irritated by the man's impatience, abruptly informed him that they didn't have the specialized part in stock and that he'd have to wait until tomorrow. The man scowled, threatened to take his business elsewhere, then marched out. Marcus, noticing the ruckus, followed the man outside to apologize, offering to call around and find the part at another location. The man paused, softened by Marcus's sincerity, and accepted the offer. James made a mental note, again one mechanic stepping up to patch the holes left by his colleagues' poor attitudes. Finally, closing time arrived. The shop began to wind down, tools were put away, and the last vehicles were carefully moved into the overnight parking area. Fluorescent lights flickered as employees threw on their jackets and prepared to leave. Marcus was still tidying up, wiping down surfaces and setting tools in their proper places, the last man standing as usual. Evan was tallying up the day's receipts, grumbling about how they hadn't reached the projected daily goal. James saw this as the perfect moment to drop the act. Approaching Evan, he removed his cap. "Evan," he said, voice steady, "can we talk for a moment?" Evan glanced up, annoyed. "What do you want?" he snapped. That's when James calmly replied, "I'm James Perry. I'm the founder and CEO of this entire auto repair chain, including this branch." The air went still. It was as if someone had turned off all the background noise in an instant. Evan's eyes widened, his cheeks flushing. He stumbled over his words, trying to explain away his behavior. "Sir, I didn't realize. If I had known." James raised a hand to stop him. "I understand," James said evenly, "that you're under pressure to maintain profits and efficiency, but that doesn't justify disrespecting our customers or your team." Marcus, who was wiping down a nearby workbench, froze. He looked at James in stunned silence, as if processing the fact that the friendly Jim he'd been helping all day was actually the big boss. James turned to Marcus. "I want to thank you for the kindness you showed me and every other customer today," he said, his tone softening. "You're the reason I believe this company can still be what I dreamed it would be." Marcus stood speechless, unsure how to respond. Summoning the remaining employees who were still present, James offered a candid apology for letting the company's culture deteriorate. "I started this business with the goal of treating every single person, employee or customer, with dignity. Along the way, that vision got lost. Some of that is on me, for trusting it would stay intact without my direct involvement. But from now on, things are going to change." He paused, scanning their faces. Some looked frightened, others hopeful. He announced a new set of programs aimed at reinforcing the original values of the company. Regular training sessions on customer service and empathy, improved break room conditions, better channels for employee feedback, and a recognition system that would reward acts of kindness and exceptional work. He emphasized that none of these changes were optional. "We can't keep running like this," he declared. "Customers are the lifeblood of our business, and we have to treat them the way we'd want our families treated." Turning back to Evan, James addressed him sternly yet without rage. "Evan, I respect your mechanical expertise, but if you want to remain a lead mechanic here, you'll have to undergo leadership coaching and prove you can treat people right. Our brand reputation is at stake. We need efficiency, but not at the expense of humanity." Evan stood there, shoulders slightly slumped. The rest of the staff watched in tense silence, waiting to see if Evan would lash out or repent. To everyone's surprise, he lowered his gaze and murmured something about being willing to change. James nodded. "All right," he said, "then let's begin fresh tomorrow. We'll bring in trainers and start re-evaluating our processes. But know this, if I ever see you disrespect a customer or a coworker again, we'll have a much different conversation." A few employees exchanged glances. For the first time, they saw Evan subdued. James wrapped up by announcing the creation of an employee support fund, an idea he'd been mulling over for months but had never put into action. This fund would help employees facing personal hardships, from unexpected medical bills to car troubles. "We're a team," he reminded them, "and teams don't let each other fail in times of crisis." He also mentioned a new initiative, the kindness bonus. Employees who went above and beyond in demonstrating compassion, just like Marcus had been doing, would receive a monthly bonus that recognized not just the quantity of their work, but its quality. Marcus looked shocked, touched, and a little overwhelmed. The other employees seemed intrigued. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in the room. Over the next days and weeks, the entire shop buzzed with the aftershocks of James's surprise visit. Word spread to other branches that the CEO had gone incognito to witness the real day-to-day culture, and that big changes were on the horizon. Some employees grumbled about corporate meddling, but most, especially those who had once felt neglected, felt a renewed sense of possibility. Suddenly, management teams started paying attention to staffing levels. If a branch was short-handed, they brought in more mechanics or offered overtime incentives. Break rooms got a facelift. New tables and chairs appeared, along with stocked refrigerators and fresh coffee. The battered, stained couches in the waiting areas were replaced with comfortable seating. Even the vending machines were fixed or replaced, so customers and staff alike had easy access to snacks and drinks. At the Brookside branch, the metamorphosis was especially dramatic. Marcus, initially unsure about his place in this new era, found himself at the center of various committees tasked with improving customer service. Though he had no formal managerial title, leadership recognized his natural talent for empathy. He helped design a short orientation for new hires, focusing on the importance of listening carefully to customers and explaining repairs in a way people could understand. James also asked him to become a mentor for some of the younger mechanics who struggled with interpersonal skills. At first, Marcus was hesitant. He didn't see himself as a teacher. But encouraged by James's faith in him, he embraced the role. Soon enough, novices flocked to him, seeking tips not just on how to fix cars, but how to interact with customers who were anxious or in a rush. In return, he insisted he was just paying forward what he'd learned from mentors in his past. Evan, on the other hand, went through a period of awkward adjustment. He was sent to leadership workshops, short, intensive sessions designed to teach conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, and team management. Initially, he bristled at what he called soft skills nonsense, but the fear of losing his position pushed him to try. Slow progress was made. At first, his interactions with customers sounded forced, his attempts at politeness almost robotic. But with consistent coaching and real-life practice, he began to soften. Staff noticed that he no longer barked at them over petty mistakes. Instead, he started offering constructive criticism. One day, he even pulled Marcus aside to thank him for covering a shift that Evan had to miss due to a family emergency. Marcus, pleasantly surprised, realized that people could indeed change if they felt truly supported, and so a tentative camaraderie formed. Customers immediately sensed the difference too. Those who had braced themselves for rushed service or aloof responses were met with friendlier greetings. Mechanics explained issues with clarity. The waiting area was cleaned up and even decorated with a few potted plants. A once mundane experience, getting your car fixed, suddenly had an air of comfort. Some regulars commented on the shift. "I don't know what happened here, but it's nice to see," said one woman who had frequented the shop for years. Another man, who used to dread the sour faces behind the counter, was startled to be offered a cup of coffee by the newly hired receptionist, who had been trained under Marcus's orientation program. In the midst of all these changes, James didn't just disappear back into his corner office. He made it a point to schedule regular undercover visits to various branches, though now most people suspected the scruffy man in casual clothes might be the boss. As a result, employees treated every new face as if they might be the CEO, ironically ensuring that all customers were treated with consistent respect. Of course, not every day was perfect. The business still had to deal with cranky customers, complex repairs, and shipping delays for parts. But the difference now was in the collective attitude. Rather than ignoring complaints or snapping at people under stress, employees communicated openly, working together to find solutions. Marcus became something of a local hero, especially after James publicly recognized him at a company ways meeting. The young mechanic blushed under the spotlight, saying he was just doing his job, yet his co-workers saw him in a new light. "He's living proof that kindness pays off," one staff member remarked. Another commented, "It's great to see someone rewarded for being a decent human being rather than just churning out completed tasks." With the help of additional training, the entire team at Brookside began taking pride in small acts of compassion. When a customer's car repairs ran higher than expected, staff members patiently walked them through financing options rather than simply demanding immediate payment. When an elderly lady came in late one evening, frantic because her battery died and she needed her vehicle for an early doctor's appointment, a group of mechanics stayed past closing time to fix the problem. Over and over, these stories echoed what James had wanted from the start, a sense that the business served as a cornerstone in its community. For Marcus, life improved beyond the shop's walls as well. The small raises and bonuses he received from the new recognition system gave him the financial stability to move into a slightly better apartment. He could also afford to enroll in evening classes at a local community college, focusing on advanced automotive engineering. The knowledge he gained there looped back into his daytime job, where he introduced more efficient diagnostic techniques that saved the company time and money. Word got around about Marcus's initiative, and soon managers from other branches were calling to consult him. James, seeing a golden opportunity, created a specialized position for Marcus, Customer-Centric Training Liaison. It was a fancy title with a simple mission: travel to different locations, share best practices, and highlight the impact of empathy on the bottom line. Evan's journey, while slower, was no less transformative. Private conversations with James revealed a man who felt enormous pressure to deliver top-notch mechanical work without mistakes, partly because he grew up in a household where failure was not an option. "My dad used to say, 'You slip up once and you're done,'" Evan confessed one afternoon during a check-in meeting. James nodded sympathetically. "That might explain your drive for perfection, but it doesn't excuse how you talk to people," James replied. Evan acknowledged this. He admitted that he'd taken out his stress on coworkers and customers, seeing them as obstacles rather than people. Over time, Evan's leadership style morphed into something more balanced. If he saw a mechanic struggling, he'd step in and guide them instead of barking at them to hurry up. Employees who once avoided him now found they could approach him with concerns. Productivity actually increased, disproving Evan's earlier belief that kindness was incompatible with efficiency. Meanwhile, the improved work culture attracted better talent. New hires applying to Brookside often mentioned hearing positive things from friends or online reviews. The Employee Support Fund came into play several times, helping a mechanic with unexpected medical bills, covering part of a receptionist's car repair, and even aiding a technician who lost his home in a fire. These acts of solidarity reminded everyone that their workplace was not just a cold, profit-driven machine, but a community of people looking out for one another. Word traveled fast, and customers began driving past competitors just to visit a shop that treated them like family. Over time, revenue went up, and staff turnover decreased, validating James's long-held conviction that compassion and success are not mutually exclusive. James, for his part, began stepping out more from behind his executive desk. He frequently visited the repair shops, sometimes unannounced, other times scheduled. Each visit renewed his sense of purpose. He'd walk through the waiting rooms, engage in friendly banter with customers, and take a few minutes to chat with the staff. At first, some employees suspected he was only there to check up on them, but they soon realized that he genuinely cared. He asked about their lives outside work, their families, and their personal aspirations. These conversations often revealed small changes that could be made to improve the employee's experience, whether it was rotating weekend shifts more equitably or upgrading worn-out equipment to reduce injuries and frustration. One memorable afternoon, James hosted a barbecue in the parking lot of the Brookside shop. The event was open to employees, their families, and loyal customers. Tables were set up with food and drinks, a local band played, and kids had a small corner where they drew pictures of their dream cars. Marcus volunteered at the grilling station, flipping burgers while chatting with people about car maintenance. Evan stopped by to help, occasionally stepping away to say hello to passing customers who recognized him. The atmosphere brimmed with warmth, a stark contrast to the tension James had felt on the day he first arrived undercover. Watching families laugh and share stories, seeing kids run around happily, James felt a swell of gratitude. This was what he had always envisioned, a community of mechanics and customers who saw each other as more than just transactions. This sense of belonging was worth more than any profit margin or stock valuation. Still, challenges arose. On certain days, the volume of cars would spike, and the staff would struggle to keep up. There were times when old habits threatened to resurface, like a tense morning when too many people called in sick and the shop was dangerously understaffed. Evan grew cranky, snapping at a new mechanic who made a small error. Before the situation could escalate, Marcus gently intervened. "We've got this," he told Evan, organizing tasks so that urgent repairs got priority and simpler jobs could be scheduled for later. Instead of yelling at the new mechanic, Marcus led him through the proper steps. Evan, taking a breath, eventually apologized for losing his temper. The day ended with a shop behind schedule, but every customer left with an explanation and an apology, accompanied by a small discount for the inconvenience. No one stormed out in anger, and no one felt humiliated in the process. It was a reminder that progress doesn't mean perfection. It means having the tools and the will to correct mistakes when they happen. One uplifting subplot involved the older gentleman whom Evan had rudely told to move it on that first undercover day. Marcus reached out to him personally, learning that the man's wife had recently passed away, leaving him to handle all household chores, including car maintenance, for the first time in his life. Marcus organized a small program where the man could drop by the shop monthly for complimentary checkups, ensuring he wouldn't have to feel overwhelmed or intimidated. Touched by the gesture, the older man wrote a letter to the company's main office praising Marcus for his kindness and the newly improved attitude of the entire Brookside staff. James read the letter aloud at a company meeting, using it as a real-life example of how one small act could ripple out, altering not just the customer's day, but the entire company's reputation. As the transformation at Brookside became more widely known, local media picked up the story. A reporter came to interview Marcus, framing him as a hero mechanic who had inspired the CEO to overhaul the company culture. Marcus, camera-shy and humble, downplayed his role, insisting that James was the visionary who'd built the company, and that many people in the shop worked just as hard as he did. When asked about the day the CEO revealed himself, Marcus laughed softly. "I thought he was just some friendly guy named Jim," he said. "It never crossed my mind he could be the CEO. But I guess that's the point. You never know who you're talking to, or what difference you can make." Of course, not all the feedback was glowing. Some employees at other branches complained that James was only focusing on Brookside, leaving them out. Others suspected this was a short-lived PR stunt that would fizzle out once the novelty wore off. A few cynics claimed that at the end of the day, a corporation is still a corporation. But the steady stream of positive results silenced many critics. Customer ratings improved, employee turnover rates dropped significantly, and even profits experienced a moderate rise, largely because satisfied customers were more likely to return and recommend the shop to friends and family. Encouraged by this, James extended the new training initiative's company wastely. He tasked Marcus with traveling to different locations, hosting workshops where he demonstrated empathetic customer interactions and the importance of teamwork. In each place, employees who had once been skeptical realized that these were not gimmicks but genuine attempts to restore a healthier, happier work environment. Over time, James recognized that the changes needed to be institutionalized if they were to last beyond his personal involvement. He convened a meeting of top-level managers to embed these values into the company's mission statement, employee handbooks, and performance reviews. Pay structures were revisited to reward not just speed and quantity of work, but also consistent positive feedback from customers. The budget for equipment and facility upgrades increased so that each branch could maintain a professional, inviting atmosphere. And the Employee Support Fund, now well-funded through corporate contributions and voluntary staff donations, was formalized as a non-profit wing of the company, providing a safety net for employees in dire need. In a particularly touching development, a few staff members who had left the company during darker days came back. One former receptionist, who had quit due to burnout and constant verbal abuse from a past manager, heard about the shift in culture and decided to reapply. She got a position at a newly opened branch and found the atmosphere welcoming and supportive. Another mechanic who had moved on to a rival garage returned after hearing about the new leadership approach. "I miss the sense of family," he explained. "I figured if the place is turning over a new leaf, I want to be part of that." James, now more present and more in tune with the pulse of his company, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Yet he never forgot the lesson he learned, that stepping away from the front lines can allow negative behaviors to grow unchecked, and that real leadership requires direct engagement with employees and customers alike. He made it a personal rule to spend at least one day a week in the field, rotating among different branches. Sometimes he still went incognito, though more often than not employees recognized him quickly. It didn't matter. He preferred that staff gave good service because they wanted to, not because they feared being caught. Throughout all this, Marcus remained the humble centerpiece of the story. Staff from other branches emailed him questions about handling tricky customer scenarios. Newly hired mechanics looked to him for wisdom on how to balance technical skill with courtesy. He joked that he was still the same grease-stained dude, just with a bigger audience. But everyone could see how deeply the changes aligned with his own values. Marcus and James often touched base about new ideas, like a Take Your Team to Work Day, where local high school students interested in automotive careers could shadow mechanics for the afternoon, or a potential partnership with community colleges to offer apprenticeships. Each initiative further wove the business into the fabric of the local communities it served. And that's how an unassuming morning at a nondescript auto repair shop led to a sweeping, lasting transformation. It started with one undercover boss, a disgruntled employee who needed a wake-up call, and a mechanic who never stopped caring even when everyone else seemed to have given up. The result was not only a renewed sense of purpose for James's company, but also a tangible reminder of what can happen when kindness, respect, and accountability converge in the workplace. The waves of positive change reached far beyond the confines of a single auto repair shop, spilling into families, local neighborhoods, and even the broader industry. Competitors took note of the company's rising reputation, causing them to rethink their own customer service strategies. Local organizations, seeing how effectively the business rallied around community needs, invited them to sponsor youth programs or car safety workshops. As for James, his life was forever changed by that day he first walked in, unrecognized and unannounced. He had always known that people could be good if given the right environment, but witnessing Marcus's compassion against a backdrop of cynicism renewed his belief in the human capacity for empathy. He kept a framed photograph in his office, a candid shot of Marcus helping that elderly customer on day one, both kneeling beside a worn tire. Every time James felt overwhelmed by corporate responsibilities, he'd look at that photo and remember why he'd started this company. The journey wasn't just about making money or expanding to new markets, it was about serving people. Machines are complicated, yes, but humans are even more so. And the key to leading them, James finally understood, was to appeal to the better angels of their nature. A few months after the Undercover incident, James organized a large company-wide meeting, inviting employees from all branches to gather in a local convention hall. Marcus was asked to speak despite his hesitance. Standing on a makeshift stage in front of hundreds of co-workers, he recounted the day he met Jim, the man in the baseball cap who turned out to be the CEO. He admitted he'd been nervous that maybe he'd messed up somehow, perhaps by not being quick enough on certain tasks, but his genuine passion for helping people remained stronger than his fear of corporate authority. By the time he finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Evan, who was in the audience, also stood up and clapped, a sign of how far they'd both come. After the applause subsided, James took the microphone. "Thank you, Marcus," he began. "And thank you to every one of you who's chosen to believe in this vision of ours. We're not perfect. We'll still have rough days, moments of stress, and times we don't meet everyone's expectations. But if we remember the core values of respect, empathy, and shared responsibility, we'll keep moving in the right direction." He paused, scanning the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "We repair cars," he said, "but more importantly, we build trust. And that trust can only exist if we see our customers as partners in a shared journey, not just transactions." The speech ended to a standing ovation, but James left the stage thinking about the work still ahead. Other branches needing attention, employees with personal challenges, and communities that could benefit from further outreach. The road never truly ends, he thought. And that's a good thing. We often think success is measured in numbers, increasing sales, lowering costs, opening more branches, but true success is better reflected in how we treat one another. James's Undercover experience reminds us that you can't fake a positive culture for long. Sooner or later, the cracks show. Yet, with enough willpower, accountability, and genuine care, it's possible to turn an entire organization around. Marcus's dedication proves that one person can indeed spark change, inspiring others to reclaim the values that should have guided them all along. Evan's journey shows that no one is beyond redemption if they're given a chance, and if they're willing to own up to their mistakes. Ultimately, a workplace built on empathy, respect, and support not only thrives financially, but also becomes a source of pride and fulfillment for everyone involved. So what can you do with this story? Let it remind you to look deeper into the company cultures you're part of, whether you're an owner, a manager, or an entry-level employee. Consider how you might treat that unimportant face in front of you if they turned out to be the CEO of the entire operation. More importantly, consider how you'd treat them if they were simply another human being deserving of your decency. If you find meaning in these lessons, share them with your network, discuss them with your team, or comment on what resonates with you. Remember, a single act of kindness might just be the catalyst for a chain reaction of positive changes. Keep that spirit alive and watch your community, whether it's a workplace, a neighborhood, or an entire industry, grow stronger every day. This story, whether real or fictional, we hope that somewhere out there people truly encounter narratives like this. Stories spark hope. That's our tagline on this channel because we believe in sharing tales that uplift hearts and awaken possibility. May you take something from this story to use in your own life. Perhaps an extra measure of understanding for someone in need, or the courage to stand up for genuine kindness. Thank you for watching.